Do you have a spreadsheet where you need to be able to differentiate certain records from one another? In a lot of situations, you can do things like filtering by a particular client or a particular dollar amount, something along those lines. But often we have to be able to do something where there's more than one condition. If the value is particularly high and the type of client is one or another. In those situations, we need to be able to leverage functions in Excel like and, or, and exclusive or. So let's take a look at the comparison between those different tools. So the idea here is that whether we're using and, or, exclusive or some other logical functions, we have these different conditions in our data where we're trying to figure out whether something meets a condition or it doesn't meet a condition. And if we have more than one condition, we need to ask ourselves, what's important? Is it important that both of them are true? Is it important that one or the other is true? And so, for example, when we decide that we want to look for whether somebody is in the HR department and whether or not they make over $100,000, there are a few different combinations that could work here. Combination number one is to use the AND function. The AND function says both of these two conditions have to be true at the same time. So in other words, this person does work in HR and they make more than $100,000 a year. So using the AND function requires that both conditions have to be true in order for it to spit out the answer true. Now the opposite of AND is OR. Or says, hey, I don't really care whether they work in HR or make $100,000. It just has to be one or the other or both. So if somebody works in HR and they also make more than $100,000 a year, that will be true. But if they work in HR and they don't make $100,000 a year, it'll still be true. And if they make more than $100,000 a year, but they don't work in HR, it again will still be true. Now, a second ago, I said the opposite of AND is OR, but actually the real opposite of AND is the exclusive OR. XOR, XOR, stands for exclusive OR, and what that means is it's allowed to be one or the other one, but it can never be both of them. So if somebody works in HR, that should be true. If somebody makes more than $100,000 a year, that should be true. But if they make more than $100,000 a year and they work in the HR department, it should actually be false. So the exclusive OR says that either part of these two circles that are outside of what AND would have done would be fine, but anybody in the overlap, those people are excluded. And let's be very clear here, everybody. It doesn't matter whether it's 2 conditions, 3 conditions, 4 conditions. If you're trying to say, hey, it's got to be item number 1, item number 2, item number 3, and item number 4, we can absolutely do that. We can use an AND function with multiple things being true. And we can also combine AND and OR together in different combinations to get different things to happen. So let's say, for example, that it could either be that item number 1 is true and item number 2 is true, or it could be that item number 3 is true and item number 4 is true. So here we could put the OR function around 2 AND functions and say, hey, anything in this overlapping area would work for us. So these are different ways of understanding these ideas, and, or, and exclusive OR. And and OR are definitely the two that are most used. Exclusive OR is not used nearly as much. And in a second here, I'll also give a demonstration of how the NOT function changes all of that and flips it around. So let's take a look at a real life scenario here. Here we have the date that the invoice went out. We have the amount of the invoice. We have which client it's with. what type of client they are, what product they purchased, and who the salesperson was. And we're going to start with the logical question, is the invoice a high-value invoice? We're going to say that's above $20,000. And is it overdue? And let's say overdue means more than 60 days ago. Now, if we want to do both of those two things, we go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, click the Logical drop-down menu, and we're going to start with AND. In an AND function, two things have to be true at the same time. So we click on AND the first logical question is it a high dollar value invoice? So I'm going to click on the cell D6, and I'm going to just manually decide to put in greater than or equal to, and I'll put in $20,000. So as you can see here, the invoice for this first entry was actually $3,800, and you can see to the right that that would be false. Now let's put in our second condition. Our second condition is the invoice date overdue? So again, we'll click on the invoice date here in cell C6. And we want this to be less than or equal to 60 days ago. So we'll do a less than symbol, an equal to symbol, and then we can put in the today function minus 60. Now you can see there that it can't actually tell us yet whether that date is more than 60 days in the past because the today function is a volatile function that it hasn't calculated yet. But basically, if either one of these two things is false, it'll come out as false. So I click OK here. As you can see, yes, this is more than 60 days ago. I'm recording this at the beginning of January in 2025, so August is more than 60 days ago, but the invoice amount was not over $20,000. Now, if I come over here, put my mouse in the bottom right-hand corner of this cell so that I get a black plus sign, I can then double-click and let's just look through it here. Yes, these two entries in August are more than 60 days ago, and they're both above $20,000. This one is not above $20,000. And then down here, this entry is above $20,000, but because it's early January right now, December 26th was not more than 60 days ago. So you can see there that the falses and trues come back with whether both things are true at the same time. Next up, was the salesperson either Jackson Walker or McKenna Dean? Now, it's not really possible for the salesperson to be Jackson Walker and McKenna Dean based on the way the data is structured. So the OR function makes sense here. It's either this person or it's that person. So we'll go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, use the Logical drop-down menu, and choose the OR function. And our two conditions will both be about the salesperson. So we'll click here on this first salesperson entry for logical 1, Walker, comma, Jackson, and we'll say, is it equal to quotation marks, Walker, comma, Jackson? And then in logical 2, we'll ask a second question, is the salesperson equal to, quotation marks, Dean, comma, McKenna? And as you can see, the first entry comes back as true, the second entry comes back as false, but at the end of the day, if either of these is true, it'll say true. So I click OK, and here with Jackson Walker, it's true. I'll double click to autofill down. With Aria Johnson and Jack Hill, it's false, but with McKenna Dean, it's true again. So the OR function here has answered the question, is it Jackson Walker or McKenna Dean? Now, the exclusive OR. Exclusive OR says, I'm actually only interested in one of these things or the other thing, but not the overlap. So what kind of scenario would call for that? Oh, well, in this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, is the invoice overdue, or is it a high dollar amount? But not if it's both at the same time. So I would see this very often being combined with the AND function, because as we talked about, the exclusive OR is basically the opposite of the AND function. If the AND function is only the overlap between high value and overdue, then the exclusive OR is only those things that don't overlap between whether they're high value or they're overdue. So let's see if that's true or not here. I'll go here to the Formulas tab. I'll go to the Logical drop-down menu and choose Exclusive or XOR here. The first logical test will be, is the invoice date 60 days ago? So I click on the invoice date. I type in less than or equal to the today function minus 60. Now again, here the today function is volatile, so it's not able to tell us outright whether it's 60 days ago or not. But then for the second logical test, is it high value? So we're going to say cell D6 greater than or equal to 20,000. And as you can see, yes, the first invoice is not over 20,000. Now this is where it gets interesting. Here, we know, again, because I'm recording this in January, August is more than 60 days overdue. But we do know that the invoice amount is not above 20,000. So the exclusive OR is telling us, yes, it is overdue, but it is not high value. So that should come back as true. I click OK, and it says true. And when I autofill this down, let's look at this one right here, the next one down. This entry is overdue. This entry is high value, above $20,000. And so because it is both things, it comes back as false. The same thing down here. You see down here, it's not overdue, but it is high value. So this comes back as true. And we can see that right here we have false, and then we have true. We have true, and we have false. We have true, and we have false. We have false, and we have true. So very often we see that the AND function and the exclusive OR function can give us opposite results. Now, it's not true that it's always opposite results. You can see here that these entries are neither overdue nor high dollar value. And so because it's neither of those two things, it's actually outside of the range altogether. And so it says false for all of that possibility. Now, lastly, what about the not function? Now, the not function, I like to call it the 4-year-old function personally. You know how sometimes 4-year-olds will always do the opposite of what you ask them to do? So the not function does exactly that. Whatever function you tell it to do, it will do the opposite of that. So let's say, for example, here, I see that I want to look for McKenna Dean selling to master agreement clients, okay? McKenna Dean master agreement clients. So let's see if there's one of them here. Yes. This client right here, Trowbridge, has a master agreement. The salesperson is McKenna Dean. But you can see over here that what I'm actually looking for is it not that? So I want everything that is not both McKenna Dean and a master agreement client. How would I do such a thing? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to go to cell L6. I'm going to go to the logical drop-down menu, and I'm going to go to the not function, which is just changing and making it the opposite of whatever it was going to be. So I click here on not. And as you can see, it now says, hey, what logical function would you like to put in? Now, here's where it gets a little bit interesting. This is the first time that we are nesting one function inside of another, because the not function doesn't really do anything on its own. It's looking for you to calculate true or false so that it can turn around and give you false or true in opposition of that thing. So here, I know that I want to use the AND function because I want to know whether it's McKenna-Dean and the master agreement. So I type in AND, A-N-D, and I put in an open parentheses. Now, I could just finish this function right here. But if I'm not comfortable using the AND function just yet, I can also take my mouse, go up to the formula bar up here at the top of the screen, and click on the word AND. And what you'll notice here is that when I do that, it switches my function arguments box over to the AND function. Beautiful. So I'm going to go here to logical 1 now, and I'm going to say, in the logical 1 field, is the client type a master agreement client? So I click here on cell F6, and I'd say, is it equal to quotation marks master agreement? Now, as we can see, that comes back as false. So already we can start to tell ourselves the story. Item number 1, in an AND function, if one of the things is false, the AND function comes back false. The end. But we also know that we're about to do this inside of the not function. So that means that at the end of the process, this AND function should say false, but the not function should flip it over to true. Let's see if that's the case. Now here for logical 2, I also wanted to know, is the salesperson, cell H6, equal to McKenna-Dean? Equal sign, quotation marks, Dean, comma, McKenna, close quotation marks. That is also false. It's Jackson Walker. So this whole thing should come back as false. Now, you could click OK and get it to complete the process at this point, but I always take my mouse, come back up to the formula bar, and click back on the not function. So we see here that this logical function in here using the AND function comes out as false. And when I click OK here and put the closing parentheses on, you see that that false becomes a true. I autofill this down, and every time I see false, I know that this is a sale from McKenna-Dean to a client who has a master agreement. So we have the AND function, which shows you where both things have to be true at the same time in order for it to say true. We have the OR function, where if either of them are true, it'll come back as true. We have the exclusive or XOR function, where if one or the other is true, it'll say true, but if both are true at the same time, it'll actually say false. And finally, we have the not function, where if you put any logical function in, the not function will switch it to the opposite direction. So if it was going to be true, it'll now be false. And if it was going to be false, it'll now be true.